A short introduction for Arbex. We're a global leading SAP security provider and innovator. And we've got a platform that's based on advanced technology, so anomaly detection, so that even the most sophisticated and persistent attacks will be detected. And we provide a complete suite of vulnerability management tools that detect and protect SAP applications and custom code. And that's on-premise or in the cloud. And I don't know if you've seen the recent troubling announcements from SAP regarding cloud security, but I think it's particularly important that we protect HANA. And we'll talk about that more in detail in presentation. So with that, I will hand you over to Ivan to go into the details of the technology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth, for the short introduction. Now, let's also immediately set the context of today's short webinar. We're going to talk about SAP cybersecurity, and we're somehow going to reflect it to today's crisis, to COVID-19. Now, you may all be rather familiar already with the images that you see in front of you. Now, on the left-hand side, we see the situation to how we all have been working until about mid-March. Everyone was going to the office, everyone was working from a rather well-secured corporate network. Now, in today's world, on the right-hand side, you see that a good number of us actually were forced to move and work remotely. Now, also, instead of me doing this webinar, typically we would do that from an office environment. Now, I'm just also sitting at home like most of you. Now, to match this with science, we see, all these dots now outside of that corporate network. I did have a discussion with a scientist recently, and we were talking about free radicals. And these dots, actually, they are also free radicals when it comes to IT security. Now, when working remote, you need to be really aware of you need to have that sense of security. And when I was creating this presentation deck, I was actually looking around because I do work in the SAP cyberspace myself. So I was looking around, and the buddy in the morning, the first thing I meet is actually an 8-year-old Logitech Squeezebox. It's a very old-fashioned internet radio. Now, and I was wondering, does this device actually have vulnerabilities? And I did a quick search on the internet, and yes, indeed, it actually has quite a number of vulnerabilities. They all relate to cross-site scripting. Now, if you then again look a little bit further on the internet and you use services like Shodan, you can look for devices that have a internet connection that you can actually connect to. We do see that this old device is actually accessible at quite a number of locations. Now, this just to set the tone, the fact that we now all work remote, we all need to have a great sense of security because we are still communicating to that corporate organization that we all work for. Now, internal attacks. Now, the numbers that you see in front of us, these are numbers that reflect IT security in general, not just SAP security. But I wanted to highlight them because in average, it takes about 50 days until an internal attack is discovered. Now, when we would even map this to the SAP field, now we could even say that the vast majority of SAP attacks and exploits remain completely undiscovered. It also takes about 80 days to fix a vulnerability. Now, and we may want to map this to our own environment in working with SAP security. The time it takes until you patch known vulnerabilities easily goes to 130 days. We've seen systems that have not been patched for a much longer time. Now, in reflection of the current corona crisis, there are some very important side effects. Now, for instance, and these numbers, they are not coming from us, they're actually coming from some larger organizations. The number of brute force attacks on systems went up with 50%. Phishing emails, we receive 18 million additional phishing emails a single day. Now, you may have seen in your own inbox, it's completely flooded. So today, all by all, there are about 22 million daily attacks, these numbers are just very shocking. But why would you worry about protecting SAP? Now, we would all know what could happen if an SAP system goes down. I think some of these things we also see in today's crisis situation, but we should not underestimate the massive importance of SAP on the economy. Now, 77% of the world's transaction revenue runs through an SAP system. SAP runs 3 trillion USD in commerce and has 186 million cloud users. Now, as Elizabeth already indicated in the beginning of the session, we may all remember the press release that went out earlier this week, where SAP talks about gaps in connection with contractual cybersecurity infrastructural terms. And SAP has or will inform about 9% of its 440,000 customers worldwide. So the impact is quite enormous. Now, so far, this is all theory, of course. Now, the way we want to approach today's webinar is to actually run a sample hack. We're going to use an exploit, and then we're going to have a look on now how do we identify the attack on your SAP platform. Now, the attack itself got recorded using a virtual machine. So what we're going to do here in the first sense is we're going to call a Python script. And the Python script, of course, I do have already physical access to a network. So your internal network. And the Python script is going to execute a password spray attack. Now, what is a password spray attack? Now, using the naming convention of your SAP user master, and every organization will have a very specific naming convention, user starting with a T in this case. We're going to use password libraries that you also find on the internet. Now, actually, a script kiddie could all do this. And we are going to perform en masse a massive amount of logon attempts. We're not going to log users because we're rotating the user ID, but we're using a fixed amount of passwords. Clearly, a password spray attack may even turn into a lock attack. Now, typically, when you execute such an attack, it's not necessarily a major crime on the system, but it does give you an indication. It also will run, for a lengthy period of time. So we've done a time warp here. And as soon as we executed the script, for instance, here we see all the failed logons. We performed an enormous amount of logons. But if you let this run long enough, there's a good chance that you actually find a working SAP user account. And exactly this script was designed to, as soon as it identifies a successful logon, the handshaking worked. It also returns us the main parameters of a system, the RFC system info. Now, by the way, such a function can even be invoked on your SAP system without actually having to authenticate to the system. Everything very much depends upon how secure your SAP system is configured. Now, in this particular case, we instantly see the IP address, the system ID. We can even see the kernel version, and we could mirror back to a vulnerability database to see what kind of vulnerabilities does this kernel have. So that would be an indication, that would be a potential step in an attack. Now that we have identified a user ID that's actually working, what we can try to do is let's try to log on with that user ID. So we type in the T user ID that we found together with the password, and we try to perform a dialog logon. Let's see if this works. No, it doesn't. Because the user ID that we've breached, that we've actually hacked, is a system user in this case. So it does not allow us to run a dialog logon. So that instantly, very often you see this happening, in the steps of a kill chain. We could see that we are still in that first phase, that exploration phase. Now we go into a second script. Now we know that the password spray, yes, we do have an ID, but we can't yet log on. So the next step, what we could try to do is we could perform a SQL inject. Now SAP does have a function module for that, which is RFC enabled. So if you have the RFC library kit installed, you can call it. And we've created here a Python script that tries to extract the password hashes from your system using accessing the table USR02. It's a quite familiar table. Now, when we try to authenticate against, we list the IP address, system ID, and the client, and let's see if the logon is successful. Unfortunately not. It's actually a good thing. Here we see that the exploit on the system actually fails because there is a authorization issue. The system user that we have does not have the authorization to execute a remote function call. Now, in this case, and unfortunately, many platforms that we've evaluated, some of these actually still work, and they should not be working. Now, in this case, it doesn't work. So we would again have to weaponize a bit further. We would have to go another step further. And the next step would be, we are going to try a code inject. Also for this, SAP has a function module, RFC enabled again, and that function does exist in every single SAP product. RFC ABAP install and run. You will find code snippets on the internet that actually tell you pieces, the code lines that you would need in order to extract user IDs, password hashes. This is one of those code snippets, and we are trying to see if we can inject that piece of code using that specific user ID. So we run the Python script, again, listing the SAP user, password, IP, system, and off we go. And here we see that we've actually have a successful hack. Now, clearly, this was executed earlier today on one of our own internal test lab systems. Still, we did mask all the hash values. Now, the fact that we have access to these hash values allows us to, again, run a brute force or a decoy. We can decrypt the passwords. And of course, the complexity and the runtime will very much depend upon some of these algorithms that are there installed on the SAP basis version. Now, how can you then secure SAP? What would you have to do in order to make sure that your environment is well managed and continuously monitored? And this brings us to where we position the tooling, Securitybridge. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to open our Launchpad. So the Launchpad that we see in front of us is instantly showing us some of the main capabilities of Securitybridge. And I'm going to talk you through in today's webinar only two main capabilities. The first one being static validation of the system. Why was I able to get a user ID that has the authorization to perform an RFC call to do a SQL inject? The tool that we have for that is a security and compliance monitor. It's a tool that allows us to statically validate the configuration of your system. And we also have a number of use cases that are all pre-configured that will validate whether your authorization setup, etc., is all in order. Now, let that be the first tool that we're going to quickly zoom in onto. As soon as I will click on that icon, I instantly get a view on my entire SAP landscape. I see all the systems, whether they are HANA, whether they are Java, doesn't matter. You will all see them in one single view. Now, clearly, this is on our test lab, which is also the reason why all of these systems actually turn red. So we support you in the process of going from an insecure environment to a very well-secured environment. So the system that we've actually infiltrated in the morning, that we use to do the recording, is the AED system. It's one of our internal development boxes. Now, the vulnerability that we're talking about and the vulnerability that we've exploited is an RFC vulnerability. So let me just here search for the word RFC, because within this dashboard, there is an enormous amount of reconfigured checks that you would just have to run. If I search for the word RFC, now I can instantly see there's a number of validations that we perform that deal with an RFC vulnerability. For instance, RFC gateway security. I should normally not even be able to call such a function from an outside system. And the reason why I was able to do that is we have very likely insecure RFC destinations. The access control list on the system, they're not properly configured. And that would also be visible here. So I go into a particular check. I take one of the rules just as an example, because we will not have the time to go through the full length of validations and checks that are implemented here. But here, for instance, we would say that, yes, this system has an insecure ACL file. The access control list has a has wildcards in the config. So the system does allow connections basically from everywhere. So this is a known vulnerability. It should have been resolved way earlier. We provide you the mechanism to easily identify this, but also to mitigate. Now, of course, static security, that's a one-time event. This alone by itself is not going to be sufficient. You also need to continuously monitor to what is really happening. Now, starting off with a first hardening effort, you need to secure your system, you validate your config, make sure that your authorization concept is all in order. And all of these different areas of responsibility, they would all be covered within this single tool, but it still remains a fairly static approach. Of course, you could run this daily, you could run it weekly, and you probably get rather close. But there is also the story of the unknown unknowns. Sometimes you may have the feeling that there may be something happening on your system, but you don't have any idea on what's really happening. And for that reason, we enable you and we motivate everyone to also monitor your system. That monitoring aspect is so important because very often, and we spoke about the identification of vulnerabilities and the use or the exploitation of vulnerabilities. We do see that they just remain unnoticed on SAP because hardly anyone is actually going through its logs to validate that actually someone tried to contact our SAP box. And for that reason, we have a monitoring tool that allows us to, and if I would open it here, it allows us to 24/7 monitor all the traffic on the system. It will keep an eye on what users are doing. And as Elizabeth already mentioned in the beginning, Securitybridge focuses a lot on, first of all, automation, but also anomaly detection. As soon as you would install Securitybridge, clearly it comes with all predefined patterns and it knows what to look for. You do not have to run a lengthy implementation phase and define your own use cases. It all comes pre-configured. But every environment will be very specific. And you may have a certain process. For instance, we've done the code inject. Now, I've seen some customers where a code inject is something rather common because this is the way how sometimes they interface with external tools. Now, as soon as you would install an intrusion detection scanner like Securitybridge on your SAP platform, it would instantly start listening to the way your system operates. And we would see what is normal for your environment and what would be abnormal for your environment. So going back to this dashboard here, now going back to the password spray attack that we've done before. Now, if I just, clearly this is a demo box because otherwise I would already be shouting here. Normally, the amount of high severity events that this tool is recording should always be 0. Whether you run a single system or you've got a few hundred systems connected to this. Should always be 0. As soon as there is a number, it means there is something going on that would need your attention. Now, we've done a password spray attack earlier on the day, and we would normally, if you would normally go into the system log, first of all, you would need to go into the system log actively. It doesn't tell you automatically. It will be very hard to really identify, what to look for. But here we are, failed logins of unknown accounts. So it's an anomaly. Securitybridge has seen that, from any location, there has been an enormous amount of logins and it instantly stands out. So it already filters and it shows you what to look out for, where to start investigating, where to start maybe even mitigating if you see this happening. Now, why is this in this particular case? You see the spikes here. Now, we ran this demo, I think, a few times already in last week. And so this is also the reason why you do see several spikes here. So the tool will help you to identify those weak spots. Now you would know where to look. Now, also in case we go back to the main overview, now let's just randomly take one of the high severity events that we see being recorded. Maybe this one here. That's the RFC ABAP install and run. That's actually that code inject. And that's important. Now, the SAP system has an enormous amount of remote enable function modules, but there is only a small subset which is truly security critical. And then it becomes very important to know which are the functions to listen for. This is the knowledge that Securitybridge brings you out of the box. All of these patterns, they're all pre-configured. Of course, you can always fine-tune them yourself. You can even define your own patterns. But our target is that the SAP security baseline complemented with the DSAG security baseline. We have probably the German SAP user group, which is, by the way, a lot more extensive than the one from SAP. All of these things that are written and documented in those manuals, they're all being applied as a standard within the Securitybridge tooling. Now, going back to this example, RFC ABAP install and run, it instantly gives us a high alert. Now, what would you do with this? If you're monitoring your system, now a lot of organizations already have a security operations center, a so-called SOC, and they may be operating a SIEM solution, a security information and event management system. Securitybridge allows you to plug and play interface with about every SIEM platform on the planet. So this enables you to have that 24/7 monitoring of your SAP application. You do not need to create lengthy identification procedures within your SIEM. Everything is predefined in Securitybridge, and as soon as these events are being identified somewhere within your SAP landscape, they are also sent in real time to the Security Operations Center. Now, all of these events, if you would go into the raw logging, if you would dig into the catacombs of SAP data, you may find certain breadcrumbs. Also, the attack pattern that we've executed together. There were certain attack patterns. We've done a mass logon, and we've tried to do a SQL inject, which failed, but still it would leave a small breadcrumb. Securitybridge actually connects all these dots together, and this will help us to translate singular events into an attack pattern, but also, more importantly, even also a speaking alert message. Because if you go to the raw SAP logging, a lot of these messages are extremely cryptic. You wouldn't have to be a security geek to really understand what sometimes certain messages mean. Now, let me quickly just zoom in onto one particular example. We've done that RFC ABAP install and run code inject. Now, Securitybridge also enables you to get all the details about a singular event. It explains you, first of all, raw documentation. What's the risk that you're dealing with? How often does this occur in my system? Now, clearly, we've run a number of demos on this system, so this is the reason why you see a lot of SQL injects. For instance, in the last 2 weeks, we've done this 43 times. So we all keep statistics within the tool. That will help you to also evaluate later on whether the breach is something that happens on a regular basis, and maybe it's a risk that you would have to accept. And you can also accept that within the tooling, or whether this is something that you really would have to start acting on. Now, Securitybridge allows you to perform correlation. There's a timeline, and here we see, there's an inbound call, and it relates us to the function module. It relates us to the inject. Now, if I would also change my time selection, it would also even connect it to the SQL inject. It would also connect it to the failed login attempts, and so that correlation is also there, readily available. Now, all of this data is sent in real time to the Security Operations Center. Security Operations Center, even though they may not be SAP experts, they would still know with every single event whom to contact. They would know the severity. They can even perform a back lookup in SAP. So that actually completes the entire circle. You got a static view on SAP security, but you also have that event-based view on SAP security. Now, of course, these are just two components of a far larger tool set. We also, and a lot of vulnerabilities in SAP deal with code security. Also, ABAP code, we keep a very close eye on ABAP code. We have a code vulnerability analyzer that you can even integrate within your SAP product development lifecycle. Or you can, if there would be a code inject, we also validate the code. So another vector that we've used today is RFC security. We also have, within the same toolkit, There's the ability to perform a pen test using all the RFC destinations that your SAP landscape may have. And it will also even plot you a chart or a view showing all the RFC traffic in the landscape. So there's a lot of smaller apps within the same tool set that will help to build you that 360-degree view on SAP Security. Now, let me quickly jump back to the PowerPoint. Now, if one would ask me, what are the 3 most important reasons for even evaluating security or looking at Securitybridge, is the first and foremost reason is, play by the rules. What we mean with that is when you look at SAP security, the first thing that you will have to do is you establish yourself a security baseline. And I've already mentioned it in the beginning. SAP has a great manual for it. There are a lot of user groups that, even add additional things to that rule set. But once you establish the rule set, you need to make sure that everyone does respect the rule set. Also the internal people that actually created the rule set, they would have to live the same rules. And this is what Securitybridge does. We have that dashboard. You go from, a lot of checks. The very first time you install it, you will have a lot of green lights, a lot of red lights actually. And you start mitigating, you start improving, you start modifying your parameters to the best possible way. And as soon as maybe one parameter once gets altered, you would know. So it continuously keeps an eye that the rule set that you specify is kept and continuously monitored, because we also map it to that event-based view. Second most important reason, use technology and not humans. Humans are scarce in terms of available time and budget. But SAP is a very large environment. You may have production box, but a production box is always connected to either a development box and acceptance. You may have a temporary box, you may have playgrounds. Every single system in your landscape could be a potential vector of attack. And also, if we look back on our own experience, if you would ask me to penetrate an SAP system, I would not directly aim for the best shielded production box. I would go for the less secured environments. And then Securitybridge, it monitors every single system in your landscape using a central controller, and it performs that correlation. And that also brings us instantly to bullet point number 3. SAP has an enormous amount of data sources. Now you've got your security audit log, you've got your gateway logs, you've got the HANA log, there's so many different data sources. And Securitybridge keeps an eye on all of them to see whether it finds breadcrumbs, and it's able to identify breadcrumbs located across multiple data sources, and it would correlate them, translating them into actual readable and actionable events. And it also brings us to the last point I wanted to mention, security automation actions. Now, let me give you one last example. You have a rule set that would say in your system, not a single user in my landscape should receive SAP all, with the exception of some firefighter users. That's the rule set. Securitybridge will tell you, before you do any monitoring, who has SAP all today. You can even have a nice report. You know exactly who has those super rights. You establish the rule set. Securitybridge starts monitoring who would receive over time, maybe by accident because you copy a user by reference and someone receives an SAP all assignment. You can do anything. Securitybridge knows exactly when this happens in real time, and you can link an action to this. You can automatically deprovision the user again. We could lock the user. You can activate hyperlogging. So if someone has an SAP all, you can actually keep a track on what they are doing in order to use that data later on for auditing and also for your compliance reporting. So Securitybridge brings you that 360-degree view.